Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ideas Sin. My name is Denise, and today I'm excited to bring to you Jen. How's it going, Jen?
Hey, it's going great, Denise. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. So Jen and I actually met in a intro to podcasting course over at the Austin Film School, which was really exciting. I mean, it was kind of cool because she had her podcast and
Yeah,
then I was on it. Now she's on mine. And it's like we've come full circle, which I absolutely love.
me too. And I feel like that was kind of the whole point of the class, at least a little bit for me, was to like connect with other people that were also into the beginning world of podcasting.
Yeah. And so, what had gotten you into podcasting to begin with before even getting to that class?
I think it was like a lot of people just sort of taking that deep breath during the pandemic. Music has always been a center for me. It's been my true north. It's been my true love. It's been my savior in so many ways. And anybody that's met me even once, I think that's something they would walk away going, "Oh yeah, that girl with the red hair that loves music." Like I think those are like the two identifying factors about me that you get upon like immediately meeting me. And just thinking of ways that I could try and incorporate that joy when we were in such an isolating period, during the lockdown. And so I just started thinking about ways to share music and podcasting. This was back in, 2020, obviously, when the idea first came. It was still at least new to me. I wasn't listening to anything outside of like Serial or like, some of the big podcasts. And I kind of had in my head that it was a space for like true crime or murder mystery. And when I discovered, no, you could really have a podcast about anything, then I really started to think about like, oh, well, if I could do this and I could share, what would I share? If it is music, what is it about music that I'm sharing? What am I trying to accomplish? So it was really just a desire to like a longing for connection when we were all so isolated during the pandemic.
Mhm. Music is, yeah, it is a connector for a lot of people. And
Mm-hmm.
it really just, it hits a certain part of you that like sometimes you wouldn't even expect. You're just like, oh, I like that song, or I like the message, or I like the tones or whatever it is about it. I mean, for you, what exactly is it about music? Is there like a specific thing, or is it really just the overall concept itself?
It's a great question. And it's one that I think about a lot because I share this on the show. I am not a musician myself. I do not play any instruments. I do not read music. I do not sing or perform. I mean, I sing in the shower, I sing in the car. If you're ever in a car with me, bring your earplugs because it's full volume and it's not great. But I think for me, what I love about music, or one of the things, is that it can hold so much, right? It's a medium that can hold so many different emotions and memories and feelings. And it can hold that differently for all kinds of people. Like you and I can hear the same song and we can both love it, and it can mean something totally different to both of us. And that's one of the great things. That's sort of like a surprise gift of the show, is taking these songs that maybe I'd never heard before, or maybe I didn't think I love, but I hear them differently when somebody else explains to me why they love that song. And so I think for me, one of the things I really love, lyrics for sure. And then like sort of encompassed with that is just the ability of a song to hold so much for so many different people in so many different kinds of ways. And music for me, it just conjures a memory like nothing else. Like I can really put myself in a specific time and place with a song, and I found that that tends to ring true for a whole lot of people. So I love that. I can't think of anything else that can do that. I mean, food, some,
Mhm.
but you always have the nuance of like, oh, well, this is a little bit different than my grandma's recipe, or but a song's like stays consistent throughout time and history. And it's really us that interpret it differently or make it different. So I love that about music.
And do you have a specific genre that you gravitate towards, or are you typically free flowing amongst all the different types?
I mean, I think there are certain genres that I always find myself going back to, but I'm really open to everything. That's another thing that the show has been great for what are you listening to? Because people bring I get foreign language songs. I think you brought a foreign language song when you were on the
Mm,
show, and just artists that I'd not heard of. Well, you brought an artist. You brought a foreign artist. The song was in English, but yeah.
yeah, Mark
Um,
Anthony.
well, no, but then there was another too. A
Oh, yes.
female, like,
It was a guy, and we both struggle with
oh,
pronouncing
pronouncing
his
his
name.
name. That's right. That's
We're
right.
like, oh, is it this or this? But yeah.
Yeah. So I like stuff like I've been so opened up to all different kinds of things. So yeah, there are things I will always go back to. I will always go back to, the Eagles. They're like a home
Mhm.
base for me because it's what my parents listened to. I will always go back to the Beastie Boys because I love them and they remind me of being a kid. I will always go back to um like pop, popular music. That's something that I love to stay current on. I think as we're recording this episode, the Grammys are tonight. And so that's like a big night for me to kind of sit down and see all of these genres, happening at the same time. So yeah, there's not really one specific thing I go back to. I'm really just like hungry for music all the time. And in this day and age, you can get your hands on it so easily, like that's new for me too. When I was younger, we didn't have the ability to get music from Japan unless you had a friend that went to Japan and bought a whole bunch of
Yeah.
cassettes, and brought them back. You didn't have access. And I just love, like, it feels like a whole new world for me to have access to all kinds of music all the time, just with the push of a button.
Mhm. And so how was it trying to find a podcast to align with, for example? So you are aligning with a particular podcast group that focuses on music versus really just doing your own thing. What was that kind of like for you to figure out your path to combining your passions there?
It was a big leap of faith and trust. And just I think, I think about it a lot. I talk about it a lot on the show. I find that like it comes back to this a lot, sort of having the ability to surrender a little bit, especially when you're in a space that's new. My tendency is to want to try and control things.
Mhm.
And I think that the more I sort of step into, yeah, you know what? The only thing I can control is me. I can control the energy that I have around this podcast. I can control what I want it to be like at the end of the day. I can commit to not compromising my boundaries or values around that. And beyond that, it's sort of like, okay, now that all of this is in alignment and I feel clear on it, I can kind of just step into the universe with that, and sort of see what happens. And I think that that's kind of how everything came about with me landing on Super Awesome Mix Network. I have to call out Matt and Sammer, who host the Super Awesome Mix podcast. That's the flagship show on the network. And they were just completely open. I reached out to these guys out of the clear blue sky and said, I love what you're doing. And I would love to be a part of it. And my original pitch to them was that I joined their show as a third host because I was telling them that I felt like they
Yeah.
needed some female energy on their show.
Yeah.
And instead of like shutting me down or saying, you're crazy, lady that we don't know, they were like, tell us more, and they were completely receptive.
Mhm.
And so that was a good sign to me that, maybe this could be a home. And so we did this test recording with the three of us, and it came back and it was not great. It really like
Oh.
adding me into the mix kind of ruined their magic. And I was so sad. I was like, oh, I thought this was the thing. Like, I felt so good with these guys. I felt like they were
Mhm.
aligned with what I wanted to do. They love music as much as I do. They're coming from a place of positivity. They're not, that was something I was really, adamant about. I didn't want to be, and no disrespect to these outlets because I read them, I love them. I didn't want to be stereo gum. I didn't want to be pitchfork. I didn't want to be only about breaking the next coolest thing. I wanted the show to be about music is for everyone, not just the kids who are, if you know kind of crowd. And music
Mhm.
can be that way. It can be a little bit divisive like that at times. And I did not want that at all. So I was really happy that Matt and Sam were aligned there. It felt like a great fit. And then when we heard the recording, we were all just like, oh, darn it. So
Oh,
I kind of
really?
I kind of was sad for a few days and sat with it and thought, okay, well, what's next? And 2 days later, they called me back and said, hey, I think we can all agree that the show with you on it didn't really work great, but what do you feel about having your own show? How do you feel about that? And again, it's just like, I'm like, what do you mean? This is like, I felt like I had just
Yeah.
won, an Academy Award. Like it just felt like the best thing ever. And I think I have to attribute a lot of that to just sort of like sitting back and trusting that what's meant for me will find me, as long as I just really believe that. I think that as long as you've got like clarity about what it is you want to do, if you could kind of sit with it and just like trust that what's meant for you will come to you, it often does. It often does, even if it looks different than what you thought it was going to look like.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really cool that they offered you that,
Yeah, it
because
was
you've been able
lucky.
to expand. You've got quite a few people on your show now. You've got a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, we had. Well, what are you listening to? Just finished. I think I just recorded the 85th episode, which is great.
Oh
And
my gosh.
I know,
That's awesome.
when we started the show, the network had super awesome mix. And what are you listening to? And now we have three more shows. We just launched a show called Play by Play, that's kind of sports and music. We have
Mm,
one called The Battle, that's like our version of a bracket competition around music. And then
mhm.
we have Super Awesome You, which is kind of a motivational podcast that also has like motivational playlists and songs that accompany that. So yeah, we've grown from it originally started with one show to now, fast forward, 2 years, and we have 5 shows on the network. So it's been good.
That's really cool. So, to prepare for your own show, or even just preparing yourself to be on a podcast in general, as you're seeking out different opportunities, did you do anything to prepare yourself? Like, were you reading? Were you practicing your podcast voice? Like, what kind of things did you do to prepare, or were you just reaching out and being like, "Yeah, we'll just see how this goes"?
No, you know what? I'm a sucker for an interview show. I've loved them since I was a kid, pop culture. Like any magazine I could get my hands on as a child. I used to read the freaking TV Guide. Like I just was so
Yeah,
interested in it. And
yeah.
so that's always like flowing around. And then just watching a ton of interview shows. Like I love Terry Gross on Fresh Air. I listen to a lot of NPR. I love Chris Wallace. I love Barbara Walters back in the day. Like I think that I've always been fascinated with an interview show, so it's always kind of been in the background for me too. And so I think that that was a lot of the prep work that I did. Like, what kinds of questions are interesting? What is it that I want to get out of people? And the good thing is that songs are so personal a lot of the time that it kind of goes deep without me even trying a lot of the time, because people do have a personal connection with this song. So I think that that's probably the biggest prep work for my own show, is just making sure that I'm really getting into the songs that people send to me, especially if they're not songs that I'm familiar with. And then it's kind of a surprise once we go on air. I have some like facts and tidbits. I do prep work every week before we go on the show, just so I know some information about the song. But sometimes I'll use 5% of those notes, and sometimes I'll use 100% of them. It really just depends on where the conversation takes us. So I do some like practical prep work, but nothing so specific around, like I have to make sure that this is what I sound like. And I didn't listen to a whole bunch of other podcasts before starting my own, honestly,
Mm,
because I kind of wanted it to be what I wanted it to be. I didn't want to feel like it's got to sound like somebody else's. It's got to sound like Song Exploder, which is a show that I love. But I know I'm not Rishikesh Harway. Like, he has his own thing and he's great at it. And I wanted my own thing. But when I'm guesting on somebody else's show, I just try and read their prep materials and understand and think about, like, I love it. You did this, I do this on mine. Like whenever some suggestions for questions are given, because it just gives me a chance to think like, oh, okay, like these are some of the things we're going to talk about, and kind of formulate in my head what an answer to that question might sound like. And sometimes it comes out exactly like I was thinking about, and sometimes in the moment I'm like, no, actually, I think this is the right answer. So yeah, I think just like that's one thing I'll say to anybody prepping to go on another person's podcast, like read their materials, listen to an episode of their show, listen to the trailer. It really does. I think it's like, for me, it's kind of basic, like common courtesy and respect, but you'd be surprised how many people roll up and have like never listened or never heard. So I do some basic common courtesy type prep like that. But I also try, especially with podcasts that are really organic and conversation driven, I try not to think too much about it.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that that was kind of your style, because I also don't listen to a lot of podcasts. And I dabble. There's like maybe
Yeah.
two that I really invested my time into. But aside from that, like I didn't really try to copy other people's. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, but let's just see how this goes and just put things together. So I'm glad to see that other people are doing that to try to cultivate their own style and their own voice.
Yep.
So for you, how has your voice evolved over time since you started?
I think that it's forced me to think a lot about authenticity. There's
Mm,
something really strange and maybe even like magical in having to listen to yourself week over week. Like, and I listen to the shows before they're released, just because I want to make sure I'm honoring, my guests and it sounds good and all of those things. But it is a strange thing to go back and listen to yourself and make sure that what you're saying rings true when you're hearing it as a listener and not just a person trying to project who you are onto the world. Like, I think that there's so much like mask wearing and pretending and having to be a certain way. And I think that the podcast has allowed me to really find my voice, and a voice that I'm comfortable speaking in all situations, not just on the show, but in life, just everywhere, the way I show up. And it's forced me to take a really hard look at authenticity and what that means to me, and how to show up as myself, and as truly myself, not just like the Jen I'm trying to present in front of a business crowd or a group of new friends, or, the moms at school, at the high school where my
mhm.
daughter goes. And so I think that it's really like, it's helped me a lot with authenticity and trying to really honor like who I am at my core and who I want to sound like. I'm sort of air quoting here, but and I want to, at the end of the day, sound like me. I don't want to sound like anybody else. And so I'd say that's probably the biggest thing, that having a voice that kind of goes out to others, it's forced me to really pay attention to my own authenticness.
Were there any episodes that you've listened to and you were like, ugh, I don't know if I actually align to that truth or the way that I'm coming off? I mean, would you go and publish the episodes anyway, or would you edit, or would you maybe correct yourself in a future episode? Or how would that work when you do hear yourself saying something that doesn't really align, or you're like, oh, wait, the way I hear the conversation, it's not very clear that this is the meaning that I really intend for people to understand?
Yeah, I would say, you know what? It's funny. First, it's really cringy when you hear it. There's like no way around that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that I'm kind of a believer in like, there are no mistakes, like everything kind of happens for a reason. And so I think oftentimes it's worse in my head. Like, I'll record an episode, and before it goes to, before it's published, I'll like sweat something that I said, I'll even like text Matt and Sammer, because they actually produced the episode, and say like, "Ooh, how did this sound? I feel like I came off, not the way I wanted to in this." And they'll be like, "No, no, 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 it's fine." And then you hear it, and it's never as bad, or it's usually not as bad when it's out in the world as it is in your head. But there have been a couple of times, yeah, where something's gone out, and I'm like, "Oh, that did not sound the way that I wanted it to." But
Yeah.
or I'll, another thing that's like a big like personal foul for me is like getting the name of a song or band wrong, or like for music nerds, it's the way like people that are into sports can like spout off somebody's stats or whatever. Like people that are into music can tell you like what album that was from and what year it came out. And so when I mess up stuff like that, I'm like, oh, I can't believe I did that. But I just think, again, like I hope that it if somebody hears that and is like, oh no, that's not the album that was on, like, I hope that either they're engaged enough to let me know, like, that's great, or they're like, oh, you don't have to be perfect at this to do it. Like, this girl
Mhm.
has a podcast and she doesn't even know that this song is on this album, you know, like, so I think
Yeah.
maybe somebody else out there is like too afraid to do something and they see like, you know what, just go. And I hope that most of all people can tell that I'm having fun and that I'm like loving 85 episodes in. I feel like I'm as excited to talk to my guests week to week as I was episode 1. So yeah, I think that you just roll with it when you have those sort of like mistakes or happy accidents or whatever you want to call them, teachable moments. I don't know. Like I think that for me, I just kind of like roll with them. And if it's something I need to tweak in the future, I mean, there are lots of like practical things, like if I'm saying or right. That was something I noticed last season. I would go right. And it doesn't really give a person an opportunity to disagree with you, right? And there, I just did it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to tamp that down.
I feel that. Mine is usually yeah, yeah. It's like okay, guys. Like to myself, like I gotta tone down the yeah. You know, it doesn't always have to be the filler words.
Right.
It's such a pain, so I'm trying to be more mindful of it. But it's good to hear and good to see other people that are acknowledging like you do make mistakes and you do say things that sometimes are not always accurate. But again, it's just realizing we're all human. We all make mistakes. And sometimes, yeah, you may say one thing, but you mean another. And it's okay. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. I definitely vibe with that. I think that that's the way it has to be. There was so much emphasis, I think, for a long time, especially for women, you know, about being perfect. Like you can't get too
Yeah.
mad and you can't be too emotional. And, you know, you had to just do everything like better. And I think that it just, again, it's just a way to sort of exhale and say, like, yeah, no, I'm just kind of showing up as me and I'm going to give it my all. And every time I show up, I'm going to show up at 100%. And sometimes that's still not going to be enough, or sometimes it's going to fall flat, or I'm going to say something wrong. But here I am. I showed up, you know?
Hmm. So, what got you into the podcasting class? Because then you started working on the podcast, I would say, what, 2020 or 2021?
Mm-hmm.
So, you
Yep.
had a little bit of time under your belt working on the podcast before the course that we took. So,
Yep.
what drove you to sign up for that?
I mean, like part of me wants to say like divine intervention. I met such a great group of people that, you know, there are what I think 5 of us kind of core group from that class that still try and get together and still try and hang out. And I've had everybody except for one. I will not say her name because I do not want to call her out, and I'm still hopeful that
I know
she'll
who
come
it
do the
is.
show. You know who it is.
I
But
already called her out on it like last week.
see, I've got to get her on the show.
Yeah.
um, and so like I just feel like that was part of it. Like I was just sort of led to it because there was this great group of people that I was lucky enough to connect with. And I think that I had heard Mariah Gossett taught that class, and
Mhm.
I knew that she was local but had kind of grown to do big things. So I was anxious to take a class from somebody that was actually working and getting paid to do podcasting. And she had a lot of experience as a producer. And again, I don't do a lot of my own production. I source guests, I write the scripts. I think of, you know, conceptually what I want the show to be. But Matt and Sammer do a lot of the, you know, the social posting and the editing and all of that. So I wanted to have just even like a basic understanding of that stuff. So that in the event that, you know, they were slammed, I could at least help out with some of the heavy lifting. So I think that was really it. I kind of wanted to understand a little bit more about the back end, and I wanted to hear from somebody that was a successful, you know, paid producer, how they did that. And I thought she was great. Like, what a gift of an instructor she was, somebody that had been doing it, and you know, she made introductions around town. to other people that, have been helpful. So I think that everything that I wanted from the class was accomplished. But I think it was really Mariah Gossett's name being attached to the class that made me want to sign up for it. And then, getting this like surprise group of friends that, range in age from like early 20s to late 70s. Like I love too
Yeah.
that we have this like, multi-generational friend group that popped out of this class. So it was all good.
Yeah. And so what was your biggest learning from what you went in production, I guess, in podcasting? Like, what was it that like really struck you and you were like, oh, wow, I never would have thought about that?
Um, I think my first answer, I feel like is a funny. I'm like, I think just kind of like the balls that I had to just like jump in and think I could do it. Like, I feel like
Oh,
I learned that there's so much that goes into it, and just I was almost glad that I already had the show before I took the class, because I think it would have been much harder to start it had I not, because I would have worried like, oh, I need to have the script so that I'm sure I'm getting a transcript from every show. And oh, I need to make sure that I have this kind of microphone because it sounds better. I think that I would have worried a lot more about it. So I think that was one of the biggest takeaways, was just that. And I think I've said this to all of you guys in the class that have since launched podcasts, that sometimes done is better than perfect,
mhm.
because I think you really can get caught up in like all of the little nuances. There were so many pieces that I didn't even think about with the show that I've now been able to incorporate slowly, that I think do make the show better, but I think would have really scared me away from starting had I not had a show live when I joined the class. So again, like that sort of divine timing, of it putting me in there after I'd already started the show. Cause I have so much respect for you guys that started after that class, because it would have felt so overwhelming to me
Oh,
to,
it was.
yeah, right? It's a lot.
Yeah. But it's to your point. I mean, it's that perfectionist mentality and going in and looking at other people who are already in the industry. You're like, wow, they have this and they have that and they've got this and blah 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 blah. And thinking of a way to, perform at their level is intimidating. And, just being able to speak up and use your voice, like that is already a challenge in and of itself, to
Hmm.
monitor what you say and catch all of your little blips and be like, oh crap, like I say this and that, and figuring out all the technical things and learning about like post processing. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. And I'm always like, oh my God, I got to learn all this stuff. But at the same time, it's just like, all right, well, I either launch it or I don't. And so it can be overwhelming, but it's great that you got that experience firsthand, because you know exactly what is absolutely required in order to just execute on the task versus everything else that's just I don't want to say it's added fluff, but it is. It's just like extra things. It's like, oh, you have to promote on social media in this type of way. It's like, you don't have to do that yet. Like, establish your foundation, establish the main content, get that thing built out, and then you can add all the pretty colors and templates and things like. At least that's how I'm trying to view it, so I don't overwhelm myself. But
And I think that's the right approach, and being really clear about that too. Like part of it is like, yes, social media is a tool that does exist, that is, I will say, almost essential to help grow a podcast.
Mhm.
And I have zero aspirations of being an influencer, right? It's not in my wheelhouse. It's not something I want to do. And so I have to be real with myself about that too. Like, okay, if I want the show to grow, posting on social media or becoming an influencer in that space is probably not going to happen. So, what are other things I can do? Is it an affiliate program? Is it guesting on other people's shows? Is it submitting for awards? Is it press releases? Like, there are a lot of different ways, to achieve that end goal. And I think you have to think about where your skill set lies when doing it, rather than I have to do all of the things. I have to send out a press release, and I have to do social media, and I have to do I have to do an affiliate program, and I have to guest on 7 other people's podcasts a month. Like I think you have to think about where your space
Yeah.
is and sort of head in that direction.
Mhm. And so, from your experience being in the industry for a little bit now, how often do you see people start up and then fall off?
All the time. All the
Really?
time. I would think consistency is probably the hardest. Like people will get, they'll get an idea, they'll go, they'll do a few episodes and then realize like this is hard or this is time consuming or, some of the challenge, especially like interview style podcasts, it is challenging to get guests. It's hard every week to try and find people that that have the time to record, that want to come onto your show. I wouldn't say it's hard, actually. There are lots of people that are willing guests, but it's like we were talking about, I think, before we started recording, just schedules are crazy. So
Mhm.
trying to align that. The girl that I recorded with last week was in Paraguay, so like
Oh,
trying to
cool.
like figure out time zones and things like that. But again, it feels like, for me, it feels like the heavy lift is worth it because I love having just sort of this richness of guests from everywhere. But yeah, I do see a lot of people start and then stop because it is, and I feel like that's fine. Like there are plenty of things I've picked up and thought like, oh, let's give this hobby a try. And I'm not afraid. A friend of mine and I have a joke about, I'm not afraid to put a book down, right? Like I'm not one of those people that like once you start reading a book, you have to finish it. And I have friends that are like that. Like if they start page one, they're committed, no matter how terrible the book is. I'm like, I'm not afraid to put a book down. I've never been afraid of goodbye. Like I don't love to walk away from things, but if something's not working for me, I'm really okay to say like, oh, great, that was, now I know. I'd rather know than not. So yeah, I definitely see people starting and stopping. So and I think that that's fine. Like maybe you were only meant to make 5 episodes of your podcast. I think that that's a okay. But I do see that quite a bit.
Yeah. So you weren't, so in 2020, you had the idea of being on a podcast and incorporating all of these things, but what were you doing beforehand? Did you have any other types of hobbies that you were invested in, or were you doing anything even close to podcasting or anything in media or anything like that?
No, not at all. I mean, my background is as a field publicist. So I worked for a good portion of my professional career in the entertainment industry. I worked for the movie studios and lived in Los Angeles for 15 years, and then went to an agency that specialized in entertainment. So I'd always sort of been around the entertainment business, but never done anything myself for it. And right before sort of my last hobby or creative endeavor, I would say before starting the podcast was I love theater. I was a theater kid in high school and have always loved, live theater. And so I sort of ventured back into that with a local theater group here in town, and performed in one of their Christmas shows. And so I kind of had stepped back into live theater and was excited about that. And then COVID happened and sort of shut all that down too. So, yeah, I really hadn't. I think that sort of what drew me or pulled me into wanting to do the podcast was just, again, my love of radio, and radio, like old school, like when I was growing up, like there were DJs that you like
Yeah.
specifically tuned in to listen to their shows. And I wanted to get back to that. That felt like a comfortable, simpler time to me. And I was like, I miss that when you had a DJ that was on the radio that you felt like they were literally like pulling records from their personal collection and saying like, oh, you have to listen to this. And so I think that those kind of sparks together of just like this creative endeavor of live theater that I kind of thought I was going to get back to is not happening anymore. So what else brings me joy? What else do I find comfort in? And there I went right back to music again, like I always do.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how previous life experiences somehow connect to your future. Whether you realize it or not, you're like, oh, wow, this skill actually applies very well to this. I didn't ever think of making that connection.
Well, and they say it all the time, right? Like you have to think it first in order for it to be. And like what you see every day is what you become. Like if I think back to like 15-year-old Jen, I was in high school, I was working at the mall. There was a store called Suncoast, and they were part of the
Mm,
Sam Goody music corporation when we still had music stores, record stores.
Mhm.
But they were like the video end of it. So this was when like VHS, I don't even think DVD was like just starting to come out, but you still had like VHS tapes and people went to buy like videotapes from a store.
Yeah.
So it's like the retail blockbuster. You didn't rent, you bought them at Suncoast. And so part of the shtick in the store was that we always had movies going. So like from the time I was a kid, I'm like working in a place where movies are playing all the time. So you hear me talk a lot about soundtracks. That's not by
Mhm.
accident, right? I love a good soundtrack. And my walls in my bedroom were covered in movie posters. I had a Young Guns, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I mean, I wish I could remember every movie poster I had in my room, but they were wallpaper. Like I didn't have wallpaper up; I had movie posters. And then I found myself in Los Angeles in the middle of the entertainment industry, working premieres or working award shows or whatever. And it really does. I think about that a lot now. Like all of these things that I had around me, I don't think they were an accident. I think that they led me to where I needed to be and to where my happy place was. It's always been around me that way. And I think that's how the podcast kind of came into being too, was just that love of radio and DJs and music, and that sort of like podcasting popped up and gave me the opportunity to revisit that nostalgia that I love so much.
Hmm. So you are not originally from LA, right?
No, no. I was born in Oklahoma. I moved to Texas when I was 14. So I went to high school and college in Texas. And then I moved to Los Angeles in 1995. And I lived there for 15 years. So 95 to 2010, I was in LA. And then we moved to Austin, which is where I am now, in 2010. So now almost 14 years in Austin.
Wow.
Yeah.
And working in LA versus working in Austin, like they're two very creative hubs. Obviously, LA has, established itself as movies and shows, and all the superstars live there. And Austin is like this very cool, unique hub of music. It's like the music capital of the US. I think still, I don't know, Nashville, I don't know what's happening over there, but what is it like working in those two different worlds?
It's funny. It's funny to watch, the perspective of time. I talk about it a lot. Austin is so much more like LA now than it was, even 14 years ago when we moved here. Um, but for me, it's always been kind of being in the center of what it is that I love. I knew that I loved movies and film and that space, and to really like be in the center of that, you have to go to LA, so that was it. And so then sort of being able to embrace this music passion again, and explore that and what that looks like. It's great to be in, the live music capital of the world here in Austin, where you have so many musicians and you have so many people that are doing creative, unique things. And then you also have the benefit of having these great festivals like, the South by Southwest or ACL Music Fest, where you also get this influx of really like new talent, new ideas, new technologies. So I think that that's been one of the best things about being in Austin, is that in addition to having all the great music here and the reputation of that, we have a university here. It's the state
Mhm.
capital. You have this really like unique pocket in Austin, that feels different, that feels a lot more creative to me than other areas of Texas. Like, no disrespect, Houston or Dallas or San Antonio, but Austin is really, I think, kind of the only place in Texas that I would feel at home.
Do you think the creativity here in Austin is changing just because it is now really bringing in a lot of folks from bigger tech companies? Like you noted, it's now feeling more like LA. It feels like it's now starting to lose a lot of like Austin's authenticity and that weirdness and that creative aspect of music creation and all of that. Do you see that yourself in the kind of music that's being created?
Um, I would say that it's changing and it's different, but I feel okay with it. And I think that there are enough of us like old Austinites that we're gonna like bring our weird every, all the time, every day. Like there are so many people that love the culture of Austin that I don't think it's ever gonna be transformed completely. At least that's my hope. And I try and just welcome the new stuff. And if stuff comes in and I'm air quoting again, but if stuff comes in and it feels too LA, then I am also too not afraid to call that out and be like, oh, that feels super LA. That's not how we do it here in Austin. We're a lot more welcoming here. Or no, we don't judge other people that way here. Like that's not how it goes in Austin. And people are super receptive, I've found. Like the second you say, like, oh, no, 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 that's not our vibe here. Everybody's welcome. People are like, oh, great. It's funny how disarming that is because I think people like feel like they have to judge because that's almost a way to relate, about something. And I think the second that you give people permission that, you know what, it's okay to just like what you like or just be encouraging, even if you don't love this particular band or this particular performance or this kind of music, like love that they were brave enough to get up there and do it. Like it takes some gumption, to get up and put yourself out there in that way. And I found that when you're able to do that, people are way more like people that you thought were the judgiest of all people immediately are like, oh, good. It's almost like you've relieved them of a burden, like you
Mhm.
don't have to think about it that way. Like, no, that's not how we do it here. We're like super welcoming and just stoked for people to follow their passion here. Now, that doesn't mean we can't offer some critique or feedback or whatever. I'm not suggesting that at all. We want our art to stay high quality here. And I think that art has a lot of room for interpretation. And just because something's not for you doesn't mean it doesn't need to breathe and be out in the world.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that that's really cool about Austin is that it is very open and progressive in that way. So do you think that is what makes Austin weird is the fact that it is actually very open and receptive compared to a lot of other cities in the US?
I think that is one of the pieces of magic about Austin that I love. I think it is I say this a lot. I think it's a joiner city, right? Like anything that you want to do, any passion that you want to pursue, you can find another group of people to do that with you. Whether it's, our friend Pat who's into curling, right? Like who
Yeah.
knew, right? That you could do that here.
I didn't know
Whether
they had
it's
that here.
I know. And when I was at, we had a little company get together the other day at a bar in Austin called the Full Circle Lounge, and they have a skee ball league. So if
Hmm.
like skee ball is your jam, you can join a skee ball league. And like there's a lot of people. It's not like three, weirdos show up for like, I mean, like this was a full
Yeah.
bar full of people loving skee ball. Like I just think
Hmm.
there's something forever. You are involved in so many like cool activities that I think there are lots of other cities where people would be like, I'm never going to do that. That's so weird, or that's too
Hmm.
this, or that's too that. And Austin really, I think, embraces that part. So that's part of what I think is like that keeps Austin weird is we're weird because whatever niche you're into, we say like, yep. And there are 40 other people that want to do that with you. So
Hmm.
that's how I hope Austin stays. I hope that we keep our weirdness in being open to just whatever kind of activity people want to join. I hope we always support sort of that joiner mentality because LA is not like that. That's one big
Hmm.
difference, I will say. Like, yeah, there are all kinds of like leagues and things to do in LA, but if it's not like the coolest, best, most guest listy thing, people are going to kind of look down on it. Whereas I think
Hmm.
here, if I were to walk into a podcast class and say, yeah, I'm super into skee ball, people would be like, awesome. She plays skee ball. We love that about her, like.
Yeah. So what so being in LA, obviously like you indulged in exploring the music or actually the movie scene and everything
Mhm.
like that. Now, individuals who are in those cities that are a bit more judgmental or closed off to different activities, what what would you recommend for those individuals to do if they can't necessarily be as open and as expressive as they would like? what kind of tips would you give them to move forward and to not really give up on what it is that they're trying to pursue?
I think just like think about what makes you happy. And if you see somebody else doing that, respect and appreciate the joy that they have in doing that thing, right? Like, even if skee ball is not your jam, rather than like judging another person for loving it, like maybe try and tap into a little bit of the joy that they get just from doing this activity that makes them feel happy or like a kid again, or that they're good at, I would say, because we all want to do things that make us happy, and we all want to feel accepted, and we all want to feel like we matter, and I try and approach lots of things. I don't even remember where I read this, but I found myself saying it a lot over the last year. Any room that you walk into, you are no more or less important than anybody else in there. And I try and think that about everybody, right? Like, I, any room I step into, everyone in that room is the same level of importance. And I truly, like, it can be the president of the United States if I was in
Mhm.
a room with that. Like, we are all the same level of importance. Now we have different responsibilities, we have different jobs, but like all human life is the same level of importance. And I think just trying to approach it from that, like, again, you don't have to love everything. And sometimes there is art out there that I think is objectively bad, right? And
Mhm.
I try and tap into the fact that, like, you know what? Not for me, but if even one other person sees that and relates to it, then it was worth putting out there. Even if no other person relates to it, the fact that the person that made it was able to get it out of their system and into the world, like, then maybe there's purpose in that. So I would think just like like thinking bigger about things, not just the thing that you're looking at, but think about the person that created it and why it's in the world and why you even saw it in the first place. Is there a lesson there? I think just thinking of, like, I think we oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this, like having like blinders on, where you're looking
Mhm.
at things from a really narrow focus. And if you can just sort of expand out and like look into your peripheral vision and look further down the road, I think you can see a lot more.
Mhm. And it's really cool too because I mean, you had noted before when we went out and we were like doing our own thing, going to the light show.
Oh, so
You noted
fun.
it was a lot of fun. You noted that your husband also does like photography. So
Mhm.
that's really cool to see that. And you had noted, you would travel with him and like help him with his photos and things like that. But that's really cool to see that you would support one another in your own creative adventures. Do you find that a lot of people in relationships do that? And do you think that that would actually help improve their relationships if they each were able to follow their own passions and then just support each other along the way?
Oh my gosh. I think if you're not, why are you in the relationship? I think, yeah, don't even, for me, don't even engage in a relationship with a partner that's not down to support your creative endeavors, even if it's not your primary job or your, the primary way you support a family or whatever. Like, absolutely, you have to have that other part of your life, that thing that lights you up, whatever it is. And if your partner is not down to sort of get behind you on that and offer feedback and go with you on the journey, and you're not down to do the same for them, it doesn't really feel like a partnership to me. And I think that it is often a place where you can get back to, if you are finding yourself feeling far apart, like pulling somebody into your passion or your dreams or whatever is a great way. I think my husband and I have been together for 26 years now, and there are times where we'll get caught up in our own thing, and I can easily go to him and say, like, hey, I'm struggling with this episode on the show. Like, I can't get this I want to do a show about this, but I can't figure out how to drill down and make it like an actual show. Do you have any ideas? And then we find ourselves like brainstorming with one another, and like you're just connecting again. I think that's what you have to get back to, especially in long-term relationships, are those connections that light you up, and same for him. Like, if we're taking a motorcycle trip, which we like to do, and he's thinking like, am I going to bring my camera? Like, maybe I won't bring my camera on this trip. I'm like, bring the gear, bring it. Like, who knows if
Yeah.
and inevitably, when he does, we'll find something amazing to take a shot of. And inevitably, when he doesn't, we still find something amazing to take a shot of, and we use an iPhone, So
Mhm.
I think it is just remembering what each other, like what I keep saying it, but like sort of what fires you up or what lights you up as a person, and encouraging that always in your partner, always. Yeah, you have to.
And do you think that that just makes you a better partner for the other individual when you do just take a moment to step back and then focus on your creative pursuits? Or it doesn't even have to be creative. I mean, it could just be like your own interests or hobbies
Mhm.
and things like that.
I think so, and I think it's a way to find connection. My husband and I are really different. Like, he does not care a thing in the world about pop culture. It does not matter to him. I could list off 5 celebrities and he might know 2 of them. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, it's just not his jam, and so but he sees that it's mine, and so he will engage and say, "Well, tell me more about this," or, "Oh, no, I haven't thought about that. Like, let me listen to that band," or, I think yeah, you have to. And for me, I'm not a photographer, but I certainly love his work, and I could find myself, like, in our younger days, especially, getting really irritated with, this because you're a photographer yourself, but him, like, setting up lights, or, like, using a light meter to read, and, like, like, trying, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, 4 hours later we finally got the shot." But just like like understanding, okay, I know that the end result is going to be beautiful because he's putting so much care and passion into setting this shot up. So yeah, I think you do. I think it's give and take, and I think it makes you a better partner. I think it makes you better able to take care of yourself. I think it makes you a better friend, all of the things, because you're learning how to not only engage and find support around your own passions, but you're learning how to lift other people up in theirs as well. And that's, to me, that's like when the magic happens, right? When everybody's like lifting each other up. What's the saying? Like a rising tide lifts all boats. I believe that. Like, if we're all, there's enough for everybody. I don't like to operate from a scarcity mentality, right? Like, that just because you have a podcast means you're going to take listeners away from mine. No, 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 no. Like, you have a podcast, I have a podcast, anybody that wants to have one, there are plenty of listeners for all of us. Like, may we all, like, rise together. Not, I just don't, I try not to think of it in like somebody getting something is taking something away from me. I think the opposite. The more you put out there, the more there is for everybody.
Mhm. And I mean, do you have any insight into how we can potentially change that kind of mentality in our society? Because there is a lot of that where it's like, no, it's just me, and I gotta do blah, 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 blah.
Mm. It's a great question. And it's one I think about a lot, especially this year being an election year, and just all the divisiveness around, your team and my team. Like, I just think it's living it, I think it's just like living by example and trying to put energy into like minded people. And the more conversations like this one can happen, the more people can engage around the things that are hard to talk about and be okay with not saying everything right. I think that's something that we've sort of painted ourselves into a corner a little bit, where no, it's not okay to say hateful things. No, it's not okay to be ignorant. Like, I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that it's okay to say something and have it offend somebody, or have it be the not exact perfect words, and then have the opportunity to learn and grow and change from that. And I just hope that we're able to give each other enough grace to have those conversations, because I don't think anything is going to change until people that sort of think like we do start talking about it and really living by example that way. And then us giving one another grace to say, like, "Ooh, that thing that you said really hurt my feelings," or, "You said this thing and it came across like this to me. Is that what you meant?" Like, I find myself doing that a lot. Like, "Oh, when you said that, it made me feel like you were trying to get me to admit wrongdoing. Is that what you were trying to do? Is that what you meant?" And when you can have those kinds of conversations, you realize, or for me, I realize, like, 9 times out of 10, every problem I've ever had has been miscommunication. Like nothing, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
nothing more than just like one person putting something out there, the other person processing it with like an old story in their head about things, and then just like diverging, when really if you just take a second and like help me understand what you just said there, it really feels like it's made my connections a lot more true and a lot more meaningful, because you're able to get a little bit deeper with people. And then I see the ripple effects, I see other
Mhm.
people doing that, or I see somebody that I've had that kind of an interaction with doing that with somebody else. And then it feels like, oh, okay, this is how we get to change. It feels slow, it feels heavy sometimes, but I think it's really the only way to go. And it does worry me that we're just getting so far apart from one another, when I truly believe that we all really kind of want the same things and feel the same things. And we're not nearly as divided as we think we are, if we would just have like a rational conversation, not just a my team, your team conversation.
Mhm. And so a lot of that feels like we also have to just learn how to put our egos aside to be like, okay, say your truth. Let me listen to it, even if it might offend me or hurt me. And then I'll calm down and then respond.
Yeah. And then feel empowered to say, like, wow, it's interesting to me that you think that. Like, let me tell you why I think something completely different. Like I think that it has to, I'm certainly not suggesting that anybody sit with discomfort around like hateful conversations or people saying like mean and ugly things to you. Never. I'm a big believer in like advocating for yourself. And I think the only way we can learn, though, is when we do have those conversations, when we do talk to each other. I don't want it to get to the point where it's just everybody's afraid to say anything, because I think that's when the magic happens, is when we're talking to one another and we're trying to understand one another. And I think at the end of the day, too, at least for me, that's a big thing. Like I can remember in my younger years, like I have such a deep desire to be understood that if I was disagreeing with somebody, I wasn't ever in the conversation trying to change their mind. I just wanted them to say, I understand you. But it
Mhm.
got misread all the time as like, oh, Jenn is confrontational, or oh, Jenn is always trying to get me to think a certain way. Like that was never my goal, but I just didn't have the tools in my, early 20s and probably into my 30s. Um, to to let people know, like, I'm not trying to change your mind. I just want to be understood. And I say that a lot, like again, to just sort of disarm myself and other people, because I know that my energy can sometimes feel like a lot, and people are like, whoa, dial it back, like you're
Yeah.
coming at me hard. And so yeah, I think it's just having the ability to kind of take it down a notch and be able to explain yourself, like I truly don't want to change your mind, I just want to be understood.
Mhm. Yeah, it feels like a lot of people are in that situation. I mean, I've definitely been in that and am going through that in my own different ways in different areas. But yeah, it's just being understood and just being heard. I feel like
Yeah.
it's very hard to be heard, especially with given like social media and everything that's going on. That's one of the things I don't like about social media is that everybody tries to post the perfect thing all the time, and I see a lot of duplicates. Everybody's always trying to like one up each other, and it gets tiring to see that. And sometimes sharing your authentic voice and feeling like, yeah, even if I share it, am I actually going to be heard? Are people going to take the time to truly listen to me? It's one thing to listen and it goes in one ear and out the other, but to really absorb it and
Mhm.
actually take it in and be like, oh, yeah, let me actually put some thought into what it is that you're saying. Let me actually like analyze it and take it in versus like, oh, they said that, well, whatever, okay, on to the next thing, or I wasn't actually actively listening.
Yep.
So It's
And
interesting.
oftentimes, I feel like the more something bunches you up, the more you should probably listen to it, right? To figure out why. Like, why did this bunch me up? Did it make me mad because what they said was offensive to me? And what's that about? Did it make me mad because it's something I don't like that I do myself? Like I think like that's something to pay attention to too. Like when you hear something that does like, immediately like get your like hackles up, like that's a good opportunity to sort of like sit with that and think like, what's going on there? Again, just constantly being an observer, I think to that sort of thing is helpful.
Mhm. So, do you see podcasting really taking off in the future because a lot of it is now engaging in listening, active listening, and for people to hopefully share their authentic voices and expand out on their creative avenues, just because you've seen it in movies and in music, and now podcasting seems to be like this whole new thing that's been popping up. Like where do you see the podcasting world kind of going?
I hope that it is. Like my dream, and I don't know like how accurate this would be or not. My dream would be that it would sort of overcome social media. I don't love social media. I didn't grow up with it, so it's not my favorite thing in the world. And I have a 16-year-old daughter who's not on social media actually by choice, not because we have any like regulations around it, but she's just like, yeah, no, looks like a hassle. Don't want to do it. And so I hope that we're trending more towards that, where like it's a little bit easier, I think, maybe to be authentic on a podcast because you're speaking it, right? You're using your own voice. There's something that's lost when you're, typing, or even if you're doing a reels, right? Because you're holding your phone and you're worried about the lighting. And like, I think when it's just like you and a microphone, it's a smaller barrier between the line of like you and the media that you're engaging with, right? Whereas in social media you've got the lights and the reels and the phone and the timer and the like all of the things. So yeah, my hope would be that this really that podcasting stays a really authentic medium and it sort of overtakes social media. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. These models of entertainment and the way we used to get it have changed so much just in my lifetime, like with the invention of even things like cable, right? Like I was around before cable was a thing, so like the fact that like kids or people really probably like 40 or under don't remember a time when when television wasn't on 24/7. Like it used to go off at midnight. TV was done. You like it switched to static, they played the national anthem and you were done. Like no more
Yeah.
TV. And so I've seen so much change in the way we consume media and it being this sort of like on demand platform. And I love that. As a consumer, I love it. So my hope is that, yeah, podcasting really kind of assumes its space in there. And it's growing all the time. And I think people are doing really great, unique things with podcasts and still honoring that nostalgia that, like I said, I sort of long for in terms of the old days of like radio DJs and being able to share music and connect with people in that way. So yeah, I hope that podcasting continues to grow, and I hope that it stays really authentic, and that it continues to give people a pretty easy lift opportunity to express themselves. It's not like making a movie where you have to have a bunch of equipment. And I mean, although people are shooting movies on iPhones now, which also is great, but I think podcasting is a pretty low lift thing to get into. And so I hope to see a lot more people picking up a microphone and sharing their ideas.
And do you think people will actually listen? And I guess that ties into the social media thing because they're so used to just scroll, 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 scroll.
Yeah.
And the attention span nowadays, it just feels very short. So do you think people are eventually going to go back to active listening for such long periods of time?
I do. I do. I have to believe that they will. I really do because I find myself at the end of the day, like I'm guilty of like scrolling too. And I just get to the point where I'm like, ah. if I want to just put my phone, and I'm the worst about like anybody that's ever texted me and got a response 4 days later knows, like, I just want to put it away. Like, I'm done. I'm tired of looking, even though like I can enjoy the endorphin rush or whatever while I'm scrolling Instagram. It gets to the point where I'm like, I just don't anymore. Like, if I see one more TikTok video, I'm going to just like jump off the roof. I can't. And so I think podcasting is a much more soothing medium, especially when you find the shows that resonate with you. And so I think people are going to go back. I think they're going to find that podcasting is a much more comfortable space than social media is. And so I hope that that people will listen, and even if it's a smaller group of people listening, even if 100 people are listening to your show a week, that's 100 people that you were in their ear, like, and again, I feel like that's a big responsibility. And I remember that whenever I'm speaking into an open microphone, like there are people that are going to be listening. I have to be careful. Like, I have a responsibility to listeners to not just put like poison in their ears, right? Like, I want a positive message. I want people to feel like they're connected. I want them to hear a song differently or experience it in a new way because another person really loved it and had a beautiful moment with the song. Like, I think that that's the hope, is that, like, yeah, it just continues to be really an authentic medium that people are listening to because they feel some sort of a connection. And again, it's not, for me, it's not about like, I have to have the number one podcast on Apple Podcasts week over week. Like, it's really just about like, I want it to find the ears that it's supposed to find.
Yeah. I hope that that's what we're going for. We need that connection. And there is something soothing about listening to a person's voice, and just being open to information and getting different perspectives on things. And so, Jenn, as we start to wrap things up, is there anything that you would love to share with any of our listeners to either help them pursue their curiosity or help to find their passion, or anybody interested in podcasting or even following you on Super Awesome Mix as well? Anything else that you would like to share?
I mean, I think just like if you have an idea, do it. Like, reach out to people that you know are doing it or that you think can be helpful. I think that there's so much value again in, like, you learn as you're teaching, right? So anytime I've helped anybody with a podcast, I learn something. Like, I think just really, if you've got an idea, if it's something that you want to do, there's a reason that idea keeps coming to you. Like, follow it. Don't be afraid of it. Don't think, oh, I could never do this. I don't have this. I don't have that. Try it. Nobody that jumped into anything ever had it entirely figured out when they started. Legit, nobody. And I think when you remember that, when you think like, oh yeah, again, done is better than perfect a lot of the time. So if there's something that keeps nagging at you to try it, whether it's again painting or crocheting or podcasting or running a marathon or whatever it is, if it pings in your head more than once, listen to it. Like, it's to me, that's the universe like trying to tell you something. And pay attention, pursue, get curious about it, ask people that know how to do that thing. And if you don't know anybody personally, like, Google it. There are, like I said, especially if you're here in Austin, there are so many people that do all kinds of unique things. And anytime I reached out for help or said to somebody like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, could you help me? Or I'd like to do this with the podcast, can you help me? Never, and knock wood, but never has anybody been like, no, I don't want to help you. I mean, people are really willing to help,
Yeah.
but people like
Mhm.
to help. And so don't be afraid to try something because you think you don't have everything that you need. You having the idea and putting some clarity around it is everything that you need. That's all that I would say. Yeah.
And if somebody says no, ask somebody else.
Right. Yeah. If somebody says no, then like be grateful that they were like maintaining their boundaries, and maybe it makes it easier for you to say no next time, you know? Like, I think that yes, there's something to learn in all of it. And I think the more you're just like open to putting yourself out there and helping others when they ask, for guidance or help when they're putting themselves out there. Let's just like keep encouraging each other to do that, because that's when we're going to grow and be better and things are going to change.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Jenn, so much for all of your insight and your time. I know I'm always learning something from you every time we hang out, which is
Aw,
really great. So I really
same,
appreciate that. Oh, thank you.
same.
Yeah, we have like, it's really cool that we cross paths because there's just so much like unique information that we both have. And like even today, we were both like, yeah, let's dive in and do, natal charts and astrology sometime soon. And it's just
Yes.
like, that's so cool to see that, every time that we hang out, we learn something new from one another and we find common interests and we just continue to expand on the friendship, which I really appreciate. And I'm excited to see where your journey continues with podcasting and expansion into media and seeing what else develops. So thank you so much for your time. And for our listeners, I'm going to have her information in the bio. So feel free to check it out and listen to her podcast. It was really awesome. And I love it. And especially if you're a music lover, you're going to learn so much and you're going to be exposed to so many different types of music and different ways of listening and observing different aspects of music that you never really would have considered. So I definitely suggest that you tune in and listen to Jenn. She is awesome. So thank you all so much for your time. And Jenn, thank you so much for your time again. I really
Oh,
appreciate you.
thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be on the show. You did me a solid when you appeared on mine, so I'm happy that I get the chance to be on your show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. And to our listeners, until the next episode, have a good one.